Hey, welcome everybody. Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles here, and with our fifth in our series of candidate interviews that we're doing, or discussions with the courageous candidates who are out there trying to flip the House. Today we have with us Will Rollins from California. He's kicking ass, raising tons of money. He's off to a phenomenal start in this race. Will, welcome. And I think really just I'm going to turn it to you. I mean, how's it going? Tell us a little bit about the district so people can orient. How do you feel? We just had some fundraising reports that seem really positive for you, but give us the lay of the land and help us get to know you a little bit better.
Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you for having me on. I'm really, really pumped. The last 48 hours have been incredibly exciting. Not only has Kamala Harris raised what sounds like over $100 million, but our fundraising has also picked up, which I think is telling you a little bit about the down ballot impact that Madam President is going to have on all of us who are running in these competitive congressional races across the United States. And we've been having an amazing campaign. I had never run for office until the midterms last cycle, was a federal prosecutor, quit my job after helping to prosecute some of the people who attacked the US Capitol on January 6th because I was just mad. Decided to get into this race, ended up having one of the closest midterms in the country. And the second time has been even greater with the momentum on the ground because people know how close we came in 22 and they know we can finish the job in 2024. We just had a record-breaking fundraising quarter in Q2, raised over 2.2 million. We have $1.1 million cash lead over Ken Calvert, which makes us one of a handful of challengers nationally to have actually built up a cash lead over their Republican incumbent. So the campaign's been going great, including with some polling that shows us now with a narrow lead over my opponent, who's been there for 32 years and is about as far to the right as they come.
Well, it's encouraging. I mean, I think we just got a lot of fundraising numbers from the DCCC today, and like in 2022, I mean, the Republicans are having a hard dollar fundraising problem. I mean, their grassroots are not fired up for them. I mean, they are, and our grassroots is very fired up for our candidates. And you did a phenomenal job, Will. And talk a little bit about how you think the fact that our presidential nominee now is from California, how that may impact your race.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a president of the United States from California since Reagan, actually. And I think having somebody like Kamala Harris and what we've seen in the last few days has reminded me a lot of 2008. And, voters in California, especially in these competitive House races, they know Kamala Harris. They know her reputation for going after fraudsters, for going after sexual predators. They know the contrast between the first female president in the United States history, who's prosecuted sexual predators, versus the man who ended Roe and who's been accused of being a sexual predator himself. And I think that contrast is incredibly powerful and motivating for folks in Southern California, especially. And, the vice president and Doug have made their home in Southern California. I think people in the Inland Empire and in the Coachella Valley are really fired up. The amount of texts that I've gotten from our activists, from our donors, from our volunteers over the last 24 hours has been really incredible. And it's given me a big shot in the arm. And as somebody who had a career in law enforcement, and seen us have a future president who has a career and built her career in law enforcement and in the courtroom and defending our Constitution there, I think it's a great contrast for these purple seats, and people are really excited, and you can feel it in a way that is honestly unlike anything that I can remember since just graduating from college and being energized about Barack Obama in 2008, which, by the way, was the year that my opponent had the closest race in his history against a great candidate named Bill Hedrick in a much redder territory at the time. Bill Hedrick came within 2 points because the base was energized about Barack Obama. And I think that is exactly what's going to happen in 2024. And I think we can beat Ken Calvert by 6 to 7 points in this district.
Can you talk a little bit about where the district is and what the strategy is to deal with the challenge that you have, which is you're just one district in, greater Los Angeles. The media market's very expensive. help us give us a little bit of the lay of the land physically, right, where you are, and help us understand how a campaign like yours, where you're in this massive media market, sort of strategizes how you're going to reach voters in these closing days.
Yeah, a great question. I think, this is a brand new district, and maybe I'll share a little bit about what happened the first time I ran, because that'll tell you what this district looks like. And as I mentioned a second ago, I spent most of my career as a federal prosecutor, worked in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, the Justice Department. I had wanted to work in national security since I was a kid, junior in high school, walked into my first class of the day, saw the North Tower collapse on 9/11. And like a lot of kids who were 17, 18, started thinking about enlisting in the US military. But I was closeted, petrified of being outed, and didn't want to give up on my goal of doing something in counterterrorism to serve our country. So I went to Dartmouth, I took Arabic, I applied to the CIA, I sucked at Arabic, and I never heard back from the CIA.
It's okay,
And
Will.
that's my story ends. But I'm very persistent and stubborn. So I made it to Columbia Law School, and I was clerking for a couple of federal judges. And the second judge I was clerking for, she said, if you're interested in national security, apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office because they've got a national security division. And so I applied, got hired, loved it, loved being a part of the team that helps the FBI protect this country from threats from Russia, China, Iran, ISIS, Al Qaeda. But I was hired in 2016, shortly before that presidential election. And those of us who worked in federal law enforcement over the last 5 years saw a massive increase in the threats from domestic terrorism. And that could have been the neo-Nazis who were attacking Charlottesville, the QAnon conspiracy theorists who were attacking US Navy hospital ships because they thought COVID was part of a government plot. And then January 6th happened. And having a small role in that response had a very profound impact on me, because while the federal prosecutors and federal agents nationally were helping our colleagues in DC track down the folks who had attacked the US Capitol on January 6th, my opponent, Ken Calvert, was voting to decertify the election, voting against the committee to investigate the attack, and then final straw for me, called for dropping charges. So the truth about the first time I decided to get into this race is that I was just pissed off. And it was at the time, and this gets to your original question about what this district looks like now. At the time, this was a Trump +7 seat. It was California's 42nd at the time that I launched. And I told my partner, it's a Trump +7 seat. Everyone's telling me it's impossible to win, but it feels like a righteous mission and it's the right thing to do. So let's just do this. And famous last words, I promise I'm only going to do this once. So, and our credit card now reflects the fact that we've done it twice. But fast forward to election day of November of 2022, and I'm up by 10,000 votes. And I'm up because this deep red seat in Southern California in Riverside County has been redrawn in the middle of redistricting. And it's gone from a Trump +7 seat to a Democratic majority electorate. It's got huge cities in the Inland Empire like Corona, Lake Elsinore, Menifee, but it also picked up in redistricting Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, La Quinta, Indian Wells. And that change to the district completely altered the competitiveness of our race and enabled us to, what we thought on election day, flip the seat. Had a huge lead, was invited to go back to Washington for new member training, which is something that I did not know existed until I ran for Congress, and literally found out that I lost while I was on the floor of the House of Representatives on a private tour led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And so I always tell people, if you've ever been fired during a job training experience, you can relate very much to what I was going through. But we looked back at the outcome in the midterms and saw a really clear path to victory in 2024. And the reason I decided to do this again is because I think everybody who's listening to this podcast and watching this podcast right now is going to be asked the same question by generations of Americans to come, which is, what did you do when the house was on fire? And I want my answer to be that I beat the longest serving election denier in the state of California. And I think that message has really resonated with moderate Republicans who believe in the rule of law in this congressional district. It's why we were able to get supported by the former Assembly Republican leader in California, former Republican sheriff in Riverside County. It's why we were able to overperform in the midterms in a way that I think is going to be setting us up for success with that higher turnout in 2024. We had an 8-point gap in turnout between Democrats and Republicans in the midterms, and I still came within about 4 points of beating Ken Calvert. So I am really fired up about our chances in November, especially with the new lines in this congressional seat.
I mean, it's still early in this post-Kamala, environment, but I just, there are two things that I think are likely to happen, right? And we don't know for sure, but one is that I think the ugliness and the extremism of them is going to become far more visible. I think Biden's struggles were obscuring their extremism and their ugliness, as I call it, in ways that were helping the Republicans. And I think now that we've seen the torch being passed, what they're left with is this very ugly and extreme party that is exactly the kind of politics that we've been voting against again and again and again in this country since 2018, that Europe and France and the UK just voted against. And, the West, the voters of the West have been showing up and making sure that the extremists didn't gain power. And I think what happened in California in 2022, is there was this drop off, right, in Democratic performance. And now you have a Californian at the top of the ticket who lived in Southern California. Doug, for those who don't know, Doug Emhoff, her husband, was a prominent lawyer in Los Angeles. She has clear connections to the region, right? One would assume that we, not only are going to have a traditional now presidential level turnout, but even something that may be even, greater than that, because where she's showing a lot of early strength in the polling, and this will, we'll see how this goes, is with young people of color, Black and Hispanic, right? Which were always going to be the sort of the marginal turnout targets for us, right? In terms of the delta between us having losing by a little bit, having a close election and winning comfortably, a lot of that delta was going to be with the exact demographic that the vice president performs so well with, or far better than President Biden. And so given how young and also diverse your district and your region is, I mean, this is incredibly good news, for us. And it's incredibly good news for all of these races throughout California. I mean, there's no question that Kamala emerging as our nominee has made it far more likely, in my view, today that the House flips, and in part just because of what's going to happen in California and New York, right, where we're going to see much greater turnout, I think, in both places. So it's very exciting. And so anyway, well, by the way, compelling story. I just want to say I don't really know you that well, and I do want to ask you one question, which is a little bit more like a newsy question, then we'll come back, which is given your experience, reflect upon what you think it means that the former president, Donald Trump, has been he picked a guy to run with him who is, other than Rand Paul, is probably the most pro-Putin, anti-Ukraine politician in the Senate. We now have two people who seemed ideologically and politically aligned with Vladimir Putin, a guy who's been out to destroy the country and end our democracy and, return the world to a far darker place. I mean, just what's your reflection when Vance got picked, knowing how openly pro-Putin he's been? I mean, what was your reflection upon that, given your experience?
I think people like JD Vance, and I thought Pete Buttigieg put it really well last week when, those of us who've been to school with some of these people who are extremely ambitious and will kind of go with whatever way the wind blows. He compared Donald Trump and thought he might be America's Hitler. He was an anti-Trump Republican when it was trendy to be an anti-Trump Republican. And he's now shifted to become a pro-MAGA, pro-Trump Republican because it's trendy and he thinks it's going to help him become the next vice president of the United States. And a lot of us have met people who are so blinded by their ambition that they're willing to say and do anything to get elected. And I think the fact that Donald Trump picked another pro-Putin, apparently now pro-Putin, vice presidential nominee just tells you how ripe our opportunity is to bring more moderate Republicans who believe in NATO, who believe in the transatlantic alliance that has kept the world prosperous and secure for generations, the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, how many more of those moderate Republicans we have the ability to bring into the fold in purple states and in purple congressional districts. And so, I mean, honestly, my first reaction to that pick was that it was politically stupid. JD Vance does nothing to expand Donald Trump's appeal among young people, among women, among communities of color. It's doubling down on an extreme far right agenda. And the fact that this guy is 39 does nothing to increase his coalition, because he's somebody who has consistently taken these views that are so out of touch with millennials. And as a millennial myself and a Gen Z, voter in my district said this to me the other day. I mean, who is JD Vance? I mean, I think, and if you're going to pick a vice presidential nominee who is opposed to letting women make their own reproductive health care decisions, who is opposed to the LGBTQ community existing in many ways, right? I mean, that's not somebody who has broad appeal to young Americans. They're looking for future-oriented candidates who are going to bring Americans together instead of divide them further apart. And also, they want leadership. JD Vance is a follower. That's not a leader. And young people want to see them in themselves a leader for the next generation. I think that's actually exactly what they see in somebody like Kamala Harris, who looks like them, who is younger, who is energetic, who is kind. That's what we as Americans, and especially young Americans, I think, are craving in this moment. So I think it was a good pick for our team. And I think as we were talking about a second ago, the fact that they are reportedly considering replacing him tells you how devastating choice was.
Well, and the other thing that is stunning to me, right, because I didn't spend a lot of time studying JD Vance over the last couple of years, right, is that he is also he's against no fault divorce. I mean, this is like pure Handmaid's Tale stuff, right? He wants, and he said there's an on-camera interview with him where he says that women in abusive marriages need to stay in the marriage in order to because it's good for the children. And I just couldn't believe that somebody in their 30s in the United States could have said something like this. And I do, I just did a New York Times interview, and I said, this is the modern pragmatic, this sort of forward backward frame that Kamala is already using, that Vice President Harris is already using, is going to become salient and powerful now, because she's running against the oldest person to now ever be a presidential nominee in our history. Trump is older than Biden was 4 years ago. But it's also their views. I mean, she did a very good job yesterday, out of the box. Her first set of remarks were, I think, going to be very powerful for you, right? I mean, I think the frame that she gave us yesterday is going to work very, very well in swing districts, because it wasn't deeply partisan, right? It was about the forward backward frame. I think is when we're at our best in many ways as Democrats, and that frame became far more salient and powerful over the last few days, and because it allows us to describe Vance's views and Trump's views as a return to a dark age and an unpleasant age. And I still think, I just can't get over the no fault divorce thing. I mean, I still, of all the things that they've, are you really you really want to go back to a place where women can't divorce their husbands? I mean, it's so bananas to me that we're even having this conversation. And so anyway, I do think that they have that their ugliness and their extremism is far more exposed now to the voters than it was a few days ago, and it gives me hope. And so let me ask, I want to let you go, Will, because I know you're keeping a tight schedule. Is there anything else you want to say to folks? I mean, about how people can volunteer? We are encouraging our supporters to participate in your remote phone banks when available. How's the canvassing going? I mean, tell us a little bit about the mechanics of the campaign and how people may be able to help you in addition to giving you money.
Yeah. So let me first say I completely agree about just how excited I am about this contrast and this matchup. And I think that if you look at what happened in the midterms in California and New York, when turnout was lower, where reproductive rights people, I think, misperceived the threat, they aren't going to make that mistake in 2024, especially with the contrast between somebody like JD Vance, who espouses the views that you have, but also people like Ken Calvert, who joined the lawsuit to overturn Roe, who's backed a national abortion ban with no exceptions, who has supported legislation that would enable child predators to sue their victims and the doctors to prevent the victims from getting an abortion. I mean, these are such extreme far-right views that I think that our contrast as Democrats from the top of the ticket on down is going to be incredibly powerful. And it's yet another reason why Vice President Harris is going to be a huge help to us in these competitive swing districts in both New York and in California. And if people want to help us, we could use it, because we have been knocking thousands and thousands of doors. We're targeting low propensity Democrats. We know there are 30,000 Democrats who have voted in one election since 2016, but skipped 2022 in California 41. Those are the folks that we need help reaching. And so people can go to willrollinsforcongress.com. They can sign up to volunteer. They can help us continue to raise the resources that we need in this district, because where we can communicate, we beat Ken Calvert by a really decisive margin. And we saw that because we were able to communicate effectively in the Coachella Valley, which is about a third of my district. We need to keep building resources to communicate in the western side of Riverside County, where I'm less well known. But thanks to the folks who have been so generous to us this time, we're going to have the ability to do that. And so I'm grateful again to you, Simon, for having me on and for continuing to help all of us in these competitive congressional races. And I'm excited to elect Hakeem Jeffries the next Speaker of the House.
Well, Will, thank you. Keep working hard. I hope everyone who got to watch this today realizes that we may be very lucky if Will Rollins joins us in Washington. He's not just going to be a normal member. His experience, his dynamism, he's an articulate and thoughtful guy. He's going to kick ass when he gets here. And so we need to work really hard to make sure he and our other 11 candidates win, because these districts are the key. If we win these 12 districts, Hakeem Jeffries is the speaker, period, over and out. So the money that you've been raising, the volunteering that you've been doing, the postcards you've been writing, the doors you've been knocking on, the calls you've been making, all of this makes a huge difference, particularly in these House races, right? Because what happens sometimes is that people vote, but then they drop off the House. They don't vote for the House race because they don't know the name of the candidate. And so they just skip it. I mean, we've all done that, right? We've all voted and there's a question or a candidate we didn't know and we just skip. That happens more in House races than you would imagine, right? And so one of the things that Will needs is he just needs the resources and the volunteers to get his name out there, to make sure people are aware that there is a strong, powerful Democratic alternative to their extremism. And that's one of the reasons why this stuff that Will was describing, the door knocking and everything else, this matters so much in races like this. It matters more. Your postcards, your calls, your money goes much further in a race like Will's than it does in bigger races like Senate races, governor's races, and even the presidential. So what you're doing now really matters, everybody. Thank you so much. Will, good luck. We're really behind you 100%. You're a great candidate, and we're going to be there with you on election night when you go kick his ass and win this seat for us.
Thank you, Simon. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, everybody.